only for the show, but in general. As you know that plants have a tendency of doing their own thing naturally. Some plants have very good symmetry that don't require them to be staked and anything like that. But other plants, because we want to present them in a more aesthetic way, we use some mechanics to get them to look a particular way. Now we have a few plants here. We have some Varza Cymbidium and a Renantra here that we are going to just do a quick demonstration on how to stake your plant, especially when you're taking the plant to a show. You know, there are times you take your plant to a show, and as the person setting up the show, they have to come with a lot of challenges, because how you're going to put your plant in the show that it's going to have the best presentation. And as a grower, when you stake your plant the right way and you take it to the show, it makes setting up so much easier. And I mean, even if you're not going to a show and you have your plant at your house, the plant is going to look so much more presentable when you stake it for the stake it when it's blooming. Now, we're just going to work on this Cymbidium here first. Now, if you should have left the Cymbidium in your garden like how it's going, this is exactly how it's going to look, naturally. Because after a while, when the buds start to open, they get heavy. And some plants are very floriferous, that they have a lot of blooms on the stem, on the inflorescence, and because of the amount of blooms they have on the inflorescence, as they open, the inflorescence starts to go down, go down, go down. So by the time the plant is fully open, the inflorescence is nowhere to be seen. It's probably laying on the ground or hiding in the bushes. So we are going to say this plant, if we're going to take it to the show, what would we do to this plant? Now, today is show day, and we're going to set up today. And you're going to the garden, and this is what you're going to put in your garden. Now, right off the bat, you know that this can't go to the show, you know? So as a grower, you just have to take this off, because this is going to take away from the whole presentation of your plant. So you just pull as close to the base as possible. Get this one out of your way. Now, some persons would have a heart attack just to go in the garden and do that, because they've been waiting for 1 whole year for the plant to bloom. And then, right.
Why did you cut it off again?
Because the plant, it is growing, it's gone. So, look at the bloom.
Oh, the blooms are
The blooms are fading. And as I said today, today's show day we're going to set up today. Alright, so you're taking the plant to the show, the setup. So, this is going to take away from the whole niceness of this plant, because you're not going out to your house looking like this, right? Or you're going to a pageant, right? So, we have this inflorescence that is looking quite healthy and quite nice. Now, we are going to find the angle that this plant, this inflorescence is going to present itself the best. So, from your observation, is this the best angle? For people who can see? But is this the best angle? I mean, I think some of the blooms are not looking very good, right? Is this a better angle? This is a better angle, right? So what you want to do is that when you're going to stake your plant, especially when the blooms are open already, you want to put it in a location where majority of the blooms are properly presented. You might have a few that are a little bit slanted, but you want majority of your blooms to be properly presented. So you can look at a bloom like this one, flush in the face. You see what I mean? Thank you very much. So now we identify where we're going to have this plant.
So just to clarify, properly presented means that you're seeing the bloom fully, correct?
You can see most of the blooms are flush, right in the face. You're not looking sideways, most of the bloom, because in some places, you know, because you're not paying attention from very early, some plants are going to bloom and all the blooms are going to be like this. And exactly, they're going to be facing the sun. And especially if you don't stake it early, it's going to fall, and then when they fall down like this, they're going to be properly presented to the sun, or they're going to be looking flush to the sun. So if you're staking it up, you're going to try to put it at an angle where you can get the best amount of them looking flush right at you. Now, so you can use different kind of stick. Some people use bamboo. Some other persons use very stiff wire. But it all depends on what you have. Something that can properly support the inflorescence. So you get your stake down there. And remember now, you have to try to get it as close to how you want the blooms to be looking when you're going to tie it up, secure it to the stake. Now, there are different kind of things people normally use to secure the plants to the stake. Some persons use wire. You have like this little bread twist type. Some persons buy the rainbow clip or this, the butterfly clips or the dragonfly clips. It all depends on what you have. If you don't have that, you can go to just real little wire. But remember now, the coarser the material that you're using, the more delicate you have to be when you're securing it, because sometimes these can damage in person. Right? Now, when you're securing your plants to the inflorescence, some persons tie it directly onto the stake. Some persons that's alright, depending on how mature the inflorescence is, because if it's a new inflorescence coming up, it's going to get thicker and bigger. So you don't want to secure it very tight. So by the time it starts to grow, it starts to be stifled by how tight you tie it. So you tie it close enough but loose enough that if the inflorescence gets bigger, you can have some room for growth. Right. Alright, so I mean, because this plant has already been established in a bad position, even though you're trying to get it to be looking the best, you're going to have mechanics that are going to get in your way. If you're not a fussy person sometimes about it, like we have these two leaves here, and they're very old pseudobugs, you cut them out like that, the other side, and now you have the plant having a better presentation than what it's looking before. Now, also with your stake, you don't want to have your stake all imposing that people are going to be looking at your plant and seeing a stake bomb in the face. So as much as your stake as you can hide, you get it out of the way, and your mechanics out of the way. So when you look at your plant now, is the stake imposing in the situation? No. Only person can see the stake. You're not seeing it, alright. And that is how you want to stake your plant. So if the stake is not like, oh, I'm here too, because you're not growing stake, you're not growing that, you're growing flowers. Right? So flowers is what you want to be properly displayed. So this is a simple example how you can stake your plant. This is for the inflorescence. Now for the whole plant itself now, I'm going to use this big plant as an example right here. So you have a plant like this in your garden that has been blooming the last 3 years, so you're not really paying any attention to it. Right? Because that is how we are with our plants. The least it bloom, less attention. Bloom a lot, attention. So you have a plant in your garden and this is what you find. One like, wow, it's blooming. And the show is today. What am I going to do with the plant? Now in this case, we can't do much to the inflorescence because it is very established. And some orchids have very firm inflorescence. If you try to manipulate it too much, break. And you don't want that to happen. So if you're going to now manipulate this whole plant to make sure that the blooms are looking the best, because as you can see, you know, some of the blooms are helter-skelter all over the place. So you're going to try and now angle the whole plant itself. Alright, so we can all say this is the front of the plant, right? Pardon me? I'm alright for the time. When I want it, I'm going to let you know. Alright, so this time now we're not going to put any stake on the inflorescence because we don't want to break this inflorescence. Very established and it's not going nowhere. You know, it's like some say old tree, you break them if you try bend them. To bend them young. Right. So in this case now we have to manipulate the whole plant itself. And in the shows, when you're getting your plant ready for the shows, why the plant is important is the bloom that they're really judging in most cases. So even if your plant itself is upside down, once the blooms are presented right, that's what they want to see. Because in most cases, it's the blooms that are getting judged. Right, so if you have to lean your plant to an angle where at the end of the day, the plant is not looking as it should be looking, but the blooms are looking right, there's no problem. As long as they get the blooms looking good. Because, as I say, a flower show, an orchid flower show, is a flower you come to see in most cases. Alright, so we're going to get this one in now. Now, this rhinanthera is not really a small plant, it's a big plant, so you have to get a big, firm cane. Now, some places people normally put these on good proper posts because they can manage it, and sometimes these plants can get really imposing, and small canes sometimes really don't make it to support them as you should. Alright, so in this case now we're going to use good wire, big strong wire. Now you look at areas on your whole growing stem of the plant that are not going to, like usually you want to go to places that have already bloomed. Because sometimes you might want to stake your plant and secure your plant, and when you're trying to secure your plant, you might damage areas where you might be getting inflorescence soon. So you have to think about all those things when you're staking some of your plants. So for example, this plant, all of this plant is quite mature, and all of these areas have flowered already. So now you choose these areas to use that plant to secure your plant. And then sometimes now after you do all of that now and the plant is still not presenting itself now, you go into the pots and prop it. Alright, so now you prop it now, and this is how you want to see your plant. So you see the presentation of this inflorescence now, looking much better than having it all leaning over like that. Now, in staking your plants, there are different things you have to take into consideration. For example, phalaenopsis here. We have 3 phals over here, and I'm going to just show you a typical example of what we are going to, some of the challenges you might find when you're dealing with your phals. Now, if you're into the orchid business, you have a general idea of when your phals are going to start spiking. When it's spiking, start getting ready to bloom. Now it's important that you pay attention to this, because if that inflorescence gets out of the way, you're going to have a warm time getting it back into control. Because for some plants, you might know the whole makeup of the plant of how long the inflorescence is going to be, or if it's going to be short. And if it is a short inflorescence and it goes bad from very early, you have a big problem correcting it as it goes. So for example, this plant here, looking for the growth of this plant, these have very long inflorescence, so even though it might get unruly in the earlier part of the growth, you can somewhat manipulate it and get it back into some amount of control. Now, but at the end of the day, it's not very aesthetic looking, because no matter how much you want to hide this inflorescence, you can't, this stake, you can't hide it because it's right there in the middle. So as the inflorescence starts growing out, it's very malleable. You can bend it quite easily. And you know, some persons are very careful in what they're doing, and I think the persons who are more careful are the ones who cause more damage to the plant. Just go about it like you're going to deal with a situation and get it done. So at the moment your inflorescence is about 8 inches long, you start to secure it onto the cane. Now, we want to show you an example of a person who did it quite early. So the moment this inflorescence was about 8 inches long, you secure it to the stake, and as it goes, you secure it some more. The point where you start to be considerate is when you notice that along the inflorescence you see buds start forming, that's where you stop your staking. Because you don't want to have a plant that is a phalaenopsis that is up in the air. You don't see them like that. You know, you want to have a natural flow with your flower. And it's very important that when you're going to do it now and you take the plant, and you set it. This is where you want it to stay. This is where you want it to grow, because the show is coming up and you don't want to have it like this week, and next week you set it like so, and in 3 more weeks you go and water it and you set it like so, and then the other 3 weeks you water it, you set it like so, and then at the end of the day when it's ready to bloom, every bloom is looking in a different direction. Because, well,
this is before the buds start opening, or
before the buds start opening.
what? You can move it before.
So you can move it before the buds start maturing. Because, for example, these buds aren't relatively not ready to open for the next few weeks. So if this is how you have them and this is how you set it, make it stay like this for the rest of the time. Because if you change it when you water it and you put it like so, the rest of the blooms are coming are going to be looking so, and these blooms are going to be looking that way. And so you have to pay a lot of attention now that after you take a plant, you just don't move it every day and doing something new with the plant, because you're getting it ready for a show. And we have a lot of persons who are hobbyists who just grow orchids because they like it, but we are in St. James, we have an orchid society that gives you the opportunity to put your plant on show anytime. Anytime you're having a show. So if you're growing your plants, grow it like you're going to send it to a show. Even if it's going to be blooming in January, February, June, July, August, grow it like it's going to a show, because you want your plant to look the best at all times. So just take your plants and you set them up in a way, in an area that is going to make sure that every time the buds are opening, you get it in a nice symmetry and enough hanging over there and over there. So this is a very, very, very good example of what you want to see your plant looking like. You know, even though it's quite evident that it's staked, the stake is deposing. As I said, when we start the plant blooming, we don't want to wait until we start the buds opening and everything like, oh, this is going to get, because this is what it's going to look like. This is what your plant is going to look like. And I mean, look, this is the wind blowing. Look at these 3 plants. Because not only for sure you have stakes on your plant, it's also to secure your plant. Because you have the wind blowing and we have very heavy winds. See what you see? But look at this plant. You know? So that's all the reasons you want to have your plants properly staked. Because it is not only for carrying it to the show, you want your bloom to last long, and we have strong enough wind that can break it quite easy. And the more flowers you have, the more wind you have, the more wind, the more surface tension, they can break the inflorescence quite easy. So having your plant staked also secure your plant, have it not getting too carried away and and damaged at the end of the day. Now
I have on one occasion stake the plant like up there, and then when it bends over, it kind of breaks, or it
so it breaks, and I can understand what happened here.
what happened in that case?
So for example, we have plants that have different amount of floriferousness, plants that have a lot of bloom. So this is a Sogo Euclidon, Phalaenopsis Sogo Euclidon. This is a very, in some people's cases, would be a poor bloomer. Poor bloomer. People look at this and say, oh, it's fabulous, but this is a poor bloomer. You can have plants like this that have 20 blooms. There are persons who have them 25, 30 blooms. Right. Now, in those occasions, and for some persons, it's important to know your plant, because a plant have a particular characteristic, and you repeat it if conditions are right. So if you grow this plant and the first time it blooms, you see this is what now, 7 blooms, right? 7 blooms. Second time you grow it under good condition, properly fertilized, it has 7 blooms. Don't expect it to do anything different, because you can see what it's going to be like. But at the same time, you have a Sogo Euclidon, and the first time it blooms, you have 20 blooms. Alright, for example, the cases take it and it breaks. Now you know that when you're going to stake your plant the second time around, you're going to have to use wire, 9-gauge wire. If you don't know like 9-gauge, just tell me one clothesline wire. Very malleable. So clothesline, just go to anyone in the hardware and tell them that you want galvanized clothesline wire and get the galvanized one. Because if you're fertilizing your plant and you're using all these nice salty fertilizer, the moment you use the regular steel wires, it starts to rust. And if it rusts, it's going to affect the whole thing. You don't want that happening. If you can get the coated one, better. You can get the coated wire, better. And you just bend it, and secure your inflorescence on it as it goes. If you have to add more wire, just secure it and just secure it as it goes. Because, I mean, if the plant is heavy and get too heavy, it will break. Because naturally speaking, if you go in the bushes in some countries where phalaenopsis grow wild, the phalaenopsis are on the tree like this, and the blooms are hanging over like that. So even if it has 20 blooms, it's not going to be a problem because it is hanging over naturally. But because we want to grow them in our house and in our gardens and everything, we now have to manipulate the plant in a way that even though we have a lot of flowers, it's not going to cause a problem and break at the end of the day. So it's all about when you plant. I know there are persons who like to buy seedlings, and you don't know where you're going to get when you get a seedling, but that's good. But sometimes it's good to buy a mature plant so you know you're going to get. Because at the same time, we see a lot of Sogo Euclidans blooming with one single inflorescence, and it's quite looking good. Then in our show you can look, there's a person who has a Sogo Euclidan that has about 6 branches. Right, and at the same time now, how do you deal with that? A lot of wiring. Right, so you can use one stake as your main support stake, and then you put a next stake on it and you're branching. Because, for example, if you leave some of those branching inflorescence by themselves to do their own thing, all of them bloom looking like this together. And you don't want that to happen. So what you do now is you stake it with one main stake, whether you wire or what. You can put a secondary one, and then you manipulate the branch to a different direction, and then you manipulate the other branch to a different direction. So at the end of the day, when those are not properly established and then the blooms open, you don't have a big cluster like this. Because when you take it to the show, I mean, it looks good at your house. Pretty at your house. You like to see a lot of blooms. But when you take it to a show and all your bloom look like this,
Rub up.
you'll be like, oh, it's a nice plant, but it's too cluster, And the judges don't like to see that.
Yeah.
They are very not happy when they see nice, beautiful plants that owners can manipulate and you don't pay attention. And then at the end of the day, a plant that could be awarded whether first place or second place or a third place or even greater, get an American Orchid Society award, is bypassed because the owner didn't pay enough attention to the plant when it's growing. So staking your plant is very essential for the everyday operation of your plant. If you want to have your plant looking good, presenting themselves in the best way, you exercise staking your plant as early as you can throughout the whole blooming process. And as I said, staking is not only for the bloom itself, sometimes it's for the whole plant itself. Because if you can look over to the tent right here, that plant was work. I mean, it took them about an hour to have it properly, displayed. But a lot of blooms, and then the blooms were clustered, tangled up and everything. And I mean, it would have been walked past if it wasn't properly staked. And so, as you go every day in your garden, don't make it be like, oh, sure, it's coming up, so I need to stake the plant. That is not the best way to go about it. Staking your plant should be a right throughout the year process. Watching your plant as it grows. Because even your falls, you have falls that are growing, and after a while they start to bend over, So you can just put 2 stakes between them and have them just straighten and growing nice. Because really and truly, an aesthetic plant is always pleasing to look at. No matter how the blooms are, are crap sometimes, but if it looks good how it is presented, people will stop and look at it. The journalists will stop and look at it. So as you go through the show, I want you to look and make your observation and what you consider to be something that is staked properly and something that wasn't staked properly. And if you were the grower, what would you do? And if you are a grower and you have plants that are not properly staked, when you go home, no, you can't say you never know because we are all here and know you know. Alright? So,
I have another question.
go ahead.
Vendors. How do you get your vendors? Because if you notice, vendor usually come over.
Alright, so every plant have their own little tricky problem, right? So vendors know, in most cases, if you have them especially in baskets, how am I going to take a plant like that? Now, we spoke about earlier on, that's not too long ago, if you're going to secure a plant like this. So if you're going to have a vendor that grows just the same way, we call it monopodial because it continues to grow like that, you secure a stake on that plant. Try like about 2 sections, about 4 inches apart. So you have a firm base. In this case, I would use wire, like the 9-gauge wire. You're watching fluorescence, and especially if it's a plant that you know bloom already. So you know they have a lot of rubber delights and rubber this and have big, strong blooms, and if you don't pay attention to them. Alright, so again, for example, in the ultra display, you see some vandals that very nice. Now, if you have a vandal like that, planning to come to the show, you have to secure some wires onto that plant from very early. And as the inflorescences are coming out, you branch them out and hold them firm. And when you hold them firm now, as they open, no matter how heavy they are, because they're supported, you get the presentation nice. Because, as I said, you want your plant to look nice and straight up, right? The best thing shows of a vanda that naturally it doesn't have heavy bloom. So those plants will send up a nice long inflorescence, small blooms full around. You don't have to worry too much about it. But your standard vandas now, those are very big, heavy blooms, especially if it's a straight vanda hybrid with no other thing that is going to affect the whole makeup of the plant. You're going to have nice, big, heavy blooms. So you have to pay attention to this from very early and make sure that when your plant is blooming, the blooms will hang over. Alright? So any other questions on staking before we wrap this one up?
And the same for Catalina, because they also
I mean, so for your cat layers, it's not necessarily, it's about if you're not paying attention to your plant. In most cases, a cat layer bloom will present itself quite well without any problem. But if you have your plants in your greenhouse or outside in your garden, and you're not paying attention to your plant, you're going to find that your plant might be like so, but the blooms open trying to find the sun. And then when you're trying to put it in the show now, you probably have to turn the pot sideways because it set itself already. And when you plant, and there's a good example in the show, is that when your plant set itself and open, you have a problem. How you can't just come and say, okay, I'm going to stake you now. You can't do that. You have to do it from very, very early. So, I mean, once you're paying attention to like your cat layers, you don't have to worry about staking them. But you have some cat layer hybrids that now have some things like radiant in them that will give you this long inflorescence from very early. The moment you see those inflorescence growing, just secure your inflorescence and set them. Don't move them, just water them until they're ready and open as best as you can. Alright? Any other questions before we wrap up? Alright, so I guess everybody are quite experts now in staking. So next year at the show, we should have this problem in the show for next year, alright? One more question? Never know, say something. Thank you.